Welcome to Dreamscribe, your companion on the journey to peaceful sleep. Before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this calming community grow. Where in the world are you tuning in from? I never really believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, curses, omens, they were just stories to me. Stories meant to spook you, to make you second-guess that creak in the floorboards or the way shadows stretch at night. I never bought into any of it, but I can't ignore what's happening anymore. Because now it's happening to me. I live in my RV. Not permanently, just when I need to clear my head, get away from the noise of everyday life. It's an old but reliable thing, a 1987 Fleetwood Bounder I picked up for cheap a few years ago. Rust along the edges, a few loose cabinets, but the engine purrs like a dream. I spent a lot of time fixing it up, making it my own. It's my little escape pod from reality. The first time it happened, I was parked in a remote campground just outside of Black Hollow National Forest. One of those places where the trees stretch too high, their branches tangling together in a way that blocks out most of the sky. During the day, it's beautiful, golden sunlight filtering through the leaves, the smell of pine and damp earth hanging in the air. But at night, it's different. The silence is heavier, pressing in on you, like something is watching. I remember it so clearly. That first night, I was sitting in the RV, reading some book I'd picked up from a thrift store. I had a cup of coffee going cold on the counter, my phone playing some old blues track at a low volume. Everything was peaceful, routine. Then I noticed it, the clock above the dashboard. It was blinking. Just a small flicker, barely noticeable at first. A momentary lapse, like the power had cut out for half a second. I frowned, brushing it off. Old wiring. Nothing to worry about. But then the numbers reset. 11:13 p.m. I sighed, reaching up to adjust it manually. Maybe it just needed a reset. But as soon as my fingers brushed the buttons, the RV lights dimmed, not off, just lower. Like something was sucking the power out of them. My breath hitched for just a second. Then the lights flickered back to normal. The clock, however, remained stuck on 11:13. I didn't think much of it that night. Maybe the battery was dying. Maybe the wiring was faulty. I told myself I'd check it in the morning. And I did. I even pulled out the panel to make sure the fuse box wasn't acting up. Everything was fine. The clock worked perfectly when I tested it in daylight. That night, it reset again. Same time, 11:13 p.m. This time, I was already lying down, half asleep when I heard it. A faint tap, tap, tap on the window. My body froze. My heart pounded in my ears. I live alone. The nearest camper was parked at least a quarter-mile down the road, and I hadn't seen a soul since I got here. My first thought was an animal, maybe a branch knocking in the wind. But when I sat up and looked out the window, there was nothing. Just the trees swaying in the breeze, the darkness pressing in against the glass. I lay back down, forcing myself to breathe evenly. It's nothing. It's just my imagination. Then the clock flickered again. 11:13. I watched as the numbers dimmed, then sharpened again, as if something was breathing through the wires. And for the first time, I felt it, the creeping sensation of being watched. I didn't sleep well that night. The third night, things got worse. I had parked in a different location, farther up the mountainside. A place with a clearer view of the stars, less tree cover. I figured maybe I was just psyching myself out before. Maybe the dense forest had played tricks on my mind. At exactly 11:13 p.m., the clock reset again. But this time, I wasn't the only one who noticed it. My phone screen flickered, the music I had playing skipping for a fraction of a second. The air in the RV felt heavier, charged like the air before a thunderstorm. Then the knocking started again. Tap, tap, tap. It was sharper this time, more insistent. I turned my head slowly toward the sound, every muscle in my body locking up. The window beside me was fogging up from the outside. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was racing with 1,000 explanations, none of them good. I wasn't breathing right, my chest tight with something I didn't want to call fear. Then the whispering started. It wasn't clear words, just a faint, static-like murmur, like a detuned radio playing on the lowest possible volume. I strained to hear it, my ears ringing in the silence between each barely there sound. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I lunged for the curtains and yanked them shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Silence. I stood there for what felt like forever, the air thick with tension. Then, just as I started to back away, something pressed against the fabric from the other side. A handprint. Large. Smudged. Like someone had just been standing there watching me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the lights on, one hand gripping the knife I kept near the sink. My mind was screaming at me to get out, to drive away, but where would I go? The clock had followed me to a new location. It would follow me anywhere. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I ripped the clock out of the dashboard. Wires dangled, sparking slightly as I pulled them free. I tossed the clock outside, breathing hard. My hands were shaking, but I told myself this would stop it. It had to. I had removed the source. That night, for the first time in days, I almost felt normal. Almost. I kept my lights on until well past midnight. No tapping. No whispers. The air felt still, like whatever had been there was finally gone. Then I glanced at the dashboard. The empty space where the clock used to be was still there, wires poking out like exposed veins. But in the dim glow of the overhead light, I saw it. Numbers burned into the plastic. 11:13. I felt sick. My stomach twisted as I scrambled out of bed, my head spinning. The numbers weren't just burned into the plastic, they were glowing. Faintly, pulsing like something alive. Then the knocking started again. Tap, tap, tap. Only this time, it was coming from inside the RV. The next morning, I checked the wiring. I had a basic understanding of electronics, not enough to be an expert, but enough to handle small fixes. I unscrewed the dashboard panel, expecting to find a loose wire or a corroded connection. Instead, everything looked perfect. Too perfect. There was no dust, no frayed wires. It was as if the system had just been installed. Frowning, I poked around a bit more, testing the circuits with a voltage meter. Everything was functioning normally. If anything, the clock should have been keeping perfect time. But it wasn't. That night, I decided to test something else. I pulled out my phone and opened the video recorder. If I could capture the moment the clock reset, maybe I could figure out what was happening. At 11:12 p.m., I positioned my phone on the dashboard, making sure the clock was in clear view. Then I waited. My pulse thrummed in my ears as my phone's clock rolled over to 11:13 p.m. And then it happened. The dashboard clock flickered, shifting instantly to 11:13. But it wasn't just the time that changed. The entire RV seemed to dim for a split second, like the power had surged, just for a fraction of a moment. The lights remained steady, but I felt it. A brief flicker in the air itself. My breath hitched as a wave of nausea rolled through me. And then, just as fast as it came, it was gone. I snatched my phone and stopped the recording. Hands trembling, I played the video back, half expecting to see nothing. But I saw something. At the exact moment the clock changed, the screen glitched. Just a brief distortion, like a corrupted video file. And for a single frame, there was a shadow in the driver's seat. My heart slammed against my ribs. I replayed it, paused it, adjusted the brightness. It wasn't my shadow. I had been sitting on the bed, far from the dashboard. The shadow was tall, hunched slightly, as if peering forward. It had no defined features, just an inky mass against the dim glow of the dashboard's lights. A cold sweat slicked my palms. I twisted in my seat, staring at the empty driver's chair. There was nothing there. The RV was still, silent, but the air felt wrong, charged, as if something had been here, and I had only just missed it. That was the first night I struggled to sleep in my own home. The next day, I drove to the nearest mechanic, explaining the issue as calmly as I could. The guy gave me a weird look, but agreed to check the system. After an hour of waiting, he came back, wiping grease from his hands. "Clock's fine," he said. "No issues with the electrical. Could be a software glitch, but honestly, I've never seen anything like that." A pit formed in my stomach. If there was nothing wrong, then what was causing it? That night, I debated whether to keep watching. A part of me wanted to ignore it, pretend it wasn't happening, but I couldn't. Not after seeing that shadow. So at 11:12 p.m., I turned my camera on again. My hands were clammy as I held my breath, watching. 11:12 p.m. My phone clock flipped to 11:13 p.m. And just like before, the RV glitched. The air shuddered. But this time I heard something. A whisper. Low. Indistinct. Like a voice just beyond hearing. My skin prickled as I strained to make out the words. But I couldn't. My eyes darted to the driver's seat. It was occupied. For less than a second, the figure was there. Dark. Looming. Its head tilted toward me, as if it knew I was watching. Then, in a blink, it was gone. The RV was still. The clock read 11:13 p.m. Everything was normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. I wasn't alone in my RV, and something wanted me to know it. The moment I started doubting my own sanity was the night I locked everything down, doors, windows, even covering the RV's clock with a towel, only to wake up and find the clock uncovered, still flashing 11:13 p.m. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on me. But the next night, I recorded everything. The footage should have been normal. It should have shown me sleeping, the clock unmoving. But instead, at exactly 11:13 p.m., the screen glitched, just for a second. And when the static faded, the towel I had covered the clock with was gone. Just gone. Not on the floor, not in the RV, nowhere. I rewound the footage. It was there before 11:13. Then static. Then nothing. That was the first night I truly felt fear. I started setting alarms, trying to stay awake until 11:13. My body protested. I was exhausted, my mind felt frayed. But I forced myself to sit in front of the clock, phone in hand, camera rolling. As the numbers ticked closer, an odd sensation crawled over me. The temperature inside the RV plummeted, my breath coming out in faint wisps. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin. My ears strained for any sound, wind, animals outside, but there was only silence. At 11:13 p.m. exactly, the clock flickered. The light dimmed for half a second. The moment it stabilized, a sound echoed from the small kitchen area. A single tap. My heart pounded. I turned my head slowly, scanning the area. The counter was clear. The sink empty. No dishes. Nothing should have made a sound. Tap. This time I saw it. The faucet. A single drop of water falling from the spout, landing in the sink. But I hadn't used the sink all day. I stood slowly, my movements deliberate, careful. I reached out, twisting the handle. It was completely dry. I stepped back. The clock flickered again. The air seemed to shift. And then, from the bedroom area of the RV, something creaked. A footstep. I turned so fast my vision blurred. The space was empty, but the sound had been unmistakable. I stayed awake all night. By the fifth night, I was losing my grip. The lack of sleep, the paranoia, the feeling that something unseen was aware of me. I felt like I was unraveling. The worst part wasn't even the clock or the noises. It was the reflection. It happened when I was brushing my teeth, trying to keep some semblance of normalcy. The small mirror above the RV's sink reflected my tired face, the dark circles under my eyes. Then, as I turned away, I saw it. The reflection of the clock. But it wasn't 11:13. It was counting down. 11:12, 11:11, 11:10. My stomach twisted. I spun back toward the mirror, but the numbers were normal. Just frozen at 11:13 like always. I didn't touch the mirror for the rest of the night. The next morning, I decided to leave. I packed my bags, started the engine. But the moment I hit the road, my GPS glitched. No signal. No roads. Just an empty, flickering screen. The highway stretched endlessly, unfamiliar. No road signs, no exits. I had spent the last few nights consumed by paranoia. The clock resetting to 11:13 p.m. wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It was deliberate. A message. A warning. Something unseen was toying with me, and I could feel its presence lingering in the stale air of the RV. Determined to catch whatever was happening, I set up my phone's camera on a tripod aimed directly at the clock. I placed my laptop beside it, running software to detect time anomalies, even though I wasn't sure if it would help. The plan was simple. I would stay up and watch, no matter how exhausted I felt. The night was eerily silent. Even the usual creaks of the RV settling seemed to be absent. I sat on the couch, staring at the glowing numbers of the clock, my heartbeat synchronized with the passing seconds. 11:10 p.m. Just 3 minutes to go. A chill spread through the RV, raising goosebumps on my arms. The air felt thick, as if the walls were closing in. I clenched my fists, telling myself it was just my nerves. 11:11 p.m. The hum of the RV's electrical system flickered. The lights dimmed for a split second before returning to normal. My breath caught in my throat. My camera was still recording, its red light blinking steadily. 11:12 p.m. The wind outside picked up, rocking the RV slightly. I held my breath. It was always at this moment, the final seconds before the reset, that the dread truly settled in. The feeling that something somewhere was watching, waiting. 11:12:50, 11:12:55, 11:12:59. The digital numbers on the clock flickered, and then like every other night they reset. 11:13 p.m. But this time something was different. The clock didn't just reset. It glitched. The numbers warped, distorting into jagged symbols before snapping back into place. A static charge filled the air, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. My laptop screen froze, the video feed flickering erratically before cutting to black. My phone vibrated violently on the tripod, as if something was trying to take control of it. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not outside. Not in the distance. Right behind me. I spun around so fast that my vision blurred. My eyes darted across the RV, scanning for movement, for a shadow, for anything that could have made the sound. But I was alone. Or at least, I should have been. The RV's atmosphere had changed. The walls seemed darker, the air more suffocating. The clock continued its silent, eerie glow, as if mocking me. I turned back to my phone, heart hammering. The screen was filled with static. I reached out to grab it, but as soon as my fingers brushed against it, the recording resumed, and there was someone standing in the reflection of the clock. I froze. My breath hitched. The figure was barely visible, just a shadowy outline in the dim glow of the clock's numbers. But it was there, motionless, watching me. My hands trembled as I rewound the footage. Frame by frame, I watched as the clock reset, distorted, and then there. The shadow appeared exactly at 11:13 p.m. I whipped my head around again, but the RV was still empty. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but my legs felt like lead. I forced myself to press play once more. This time the figure moved. Not a natural movement. It twitched, jittered forward in unnatural jerks, like a broken marionette. Closer and closer to where I sat. And then in one final, horrifying motion, it turned its head toward the camera. Toward me. I slammed the laptop shut and lunged for the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, my breath ragged and shallow. I yanked it open and stumbled into the night, the cold air slapping me back to reality. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I staggered away from the RV, refusing to look back. The silence was deafening. The wind had died. The distant hum of insects had vanished. It was as if the world had been muted. And then, from inside the RV, I heard my phone vibrate once more. I didn't want to go back. Every instinct screamed at me to run and never return. But my phone contained proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. Proof that something was in there with me. Slowly, hesitantly, I crept back toward the open door. The interior was bathed in shadows, the dim glow of the clock the only light source. I reached in, grabbed my phone, and bolted back outside. With trembling hands, I lifted the screen to my face. A new video file had been saved. The timestamp? 11:13 p.m. I tapped it open, my heart in my throat. For the first few seconds, there was nothing but static. Then, the screen went black. A low, distorted voice crackled through the speaker, barely more than a whisper. But I understood it perfectly. You can't run from time. And then the video ended. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. My breath came in shallow gasps, my mind racing for an explanation that didn't exist. The RV's clock still glowed in the darkness, unchanged. 11:13 p.m. And as I stood there, paralyzed by fear, the numbers flickered. And reset. Again. I don't remember how I got back into the RV. One moment, I was outside, staring into the void beyond the trees, the darkness swallowing everything in its path. The next, I was standing inside, hands trembling, breath ragged, the taste of fear thick in my throat. The clock still read 11:13 p.m. It had never moved past that mark, and now I knew it never would. My phone was useless, displaying the same cursed time. The air inside the RV felt stagnant, like a place abandoned long ago. I stood there, staring at the clock, willing it to change. But it wouldn't. My mind raced. Was I trapped in some kind of time loop? Had I ever really left the RV, or was it all some elaborate hallucination? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The weight of exhaustion clung to me, but I knew I couldn't sleep. Not with that thing lurking. I sat on the edge of my seat, heart hammering. My eyes burned from lack of rest, but I refused to close them. What if I woke up, and it was still 11:13? What if I never woke up at all? Then the softest creak. The sound of something shifting. My breath hitched. I turned my head slowly, every muscle in my body rigid. The closet door, the one I knew had been shut, was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness peered back at me through the crack. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest. It was inside. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My body had become a statue, locked in place as the space between the door and the frame widened just a fraction more. A whisper. Not words, just the sensation of sound. like breath against my ear. My pulse pounded in my skull, deafening me. The whisper came again, closer this time, slithering into my mind, curling around my thoughts. It wanted me to listen. With what little courage I had left, I reached for my phone and opened the camera. The screen cast a faint glow in the darkness. I turned it toward the closet. My fingers trembled over the button. Snap. The photo loaded slowly. A blurry image, barely illuminated by the weak flash. The closet door, and something behind it. A face. Pale. Hollow eyes. Stretched mouth, open but silent. Watching me. My throat closed. My grip loosened, and the phone tumbled onto the floor, the sound too loud in the suffocating silence. Then the whisper returned. You see now. The door creaked open wider. I bolted. I flung the RV door open, plunging into the freezing night. My feet barely touched the ground as I ran. The trees blurred past, the world tilting, but I didn't care where I was going. I only cared about getting away. I ran until my legs gave out, until my lungs burned, until I collapsed onto the cold, damp ground. The wind howled around me, the stars above unfamiliar, distant, as if I had stepped into another place entirely. I reached for my phone, fingers shaking. It was still open to the last photo I had taken. I wish I hadn't looked. The image had changed. The figure in the closet was closer now, no longer hiding in the shadows. It was standing where I had been sitting. And the clock in the background, it had changed. 11:14 p.m. A scream caught in my throat. I shut the phone off, shoving it into my pocket, willing the image to disappear from my mind. But I knew it had followed me. I sat in the dirt, the wind slicing through my skin, the trees shifting in the dark. My mind reeled, trying to grasp onto reality. But the truth settled deep within my bones. The clock had moved forward, not because I escaped, but because something else had taken my place. And now it was free. Next story is, I've always loved driving at night. There's something about an open road, the low hum of the tires on asphalt, the way the darkness stretches endlessly beyond the headlights. It's peaceful. Isolating, sure, but that's part of the appeal. I've been living out of my RV for nearly a year now, taking odd jobs along the way, keeping my schedule flexible. I prefer the back roads, the quiet stretches of highway, where I don't have to deal with city traffic or the glare of oncoming headlights. My RV, an old 1987 Winnebago, has seen better days, but I keep it in decent shape. Regular maintenance, oil changes, new tires when I need them. But there's one thing I can't explain. The engine always dies at mile marker 239. Every time. It started 6 months ago, on a late-night drive through an unfamiliar stretch of highway. I was heading west, cruising at a steady 60 miles per hour, the sky a deep black void above me. My headlights carved twin tunnels through the darkness, revealing nothing but an empty two-lane road and the occasional road sign. I remember glancing at the dashboard. Everything was fine, no warning lights, no weird sounds. But as soon as I passed mile marker 239, the engine stuttered. Not just a brief hesitation, no, the entire RV shuddered violently before the engine cut out completely. I remember the way my stomach twisted as I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The engine light flickered on, and for the first time, I felt something close to fear. I told myself it was just bad luck. Engines fail. It happens. I sat there in the silence, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine, staring at my own reflection in the dark window. I tried the ignition. Nothing. For a long moment, I just sat there, drumming my fingers against the steering wheel, staring at the green glow of the dashboard clock. 11:13 p.m. I don't know why the time stuck out to me, but I remember staring at it, the way the numbers looked too sharp, too bright in the dim interior of the RV. Then, as suddenly as it had died, the engine roared back to life. No warning, no explanation. I pressed the gas, testing it, and the RV lurched forward like nothing had ever happened. It didn't stall again. The whole drive felt normal, except for the lingering unease curling in my gut. I convinced myself it was just a fluke. A bad spark plug, maybe. A momentary electrical failure. I didn't think about it again. Not until the next time. I was heading back the same way a few weeks later, driving under the same moonless sky, when the exact same thing happened. Mile marker 239. Engine stutter. Shuddering halt. I remember gripping the wheel tighter this time. My breath caught somewhere in my throat as I stared at the glowing numbers on the dashboard. 11:13 p.m. The RV was completely dead. No power, no response. Just the eerie silence of the roadside, the hum of insects outside the cracked window. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe evenly. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and then, without me touching a thing, the engine roared back to life. Like before. No struggle, no hesitation, like nothing had ever happened. I didn't drive away immediately. Instead, I looked out the window at the dark expanse of trees lining the road. There was something about this place, this specific mile marker, that made my skin crawl. It felt like a threshold, a place where something changed. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Oh yeah, my RV shuts down at the same place every time I drive past. They'd laugh. Call it a coincidence. I tried to believe that myself. Tried. It wasn't until the 4th time that I stopped pretending it was just a mechanical failure. By then, I had taken my RV to a mechanic twice. They ran every test imaginable, checked the fuel lines, replaced the spark plugs, cleaned the battery connections. Your rig's solid, the guy had said, wiping his hands on a rag. If it stalls again, you're dealing with something electrical. Maybe a loose wire somewhere. But I knew. Because every time it happened, it was always at mile marker 239. Always at 11:13 p.m. And each time, the silence after the stall felt heavier, like something was waiting. The last time I made a mistake. I got out. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the suffocating quiet. Maybe it was the creeping sense that this wasn't just an engine problem anymore. But that night, when the RV died again, I stepped outside. The air was thick, too still. The only sound was the distant rustling of trees in the breeze. I walked toward the road sign, mile marker 239. It looked old, far older than it should have been. The metal was rusted, the reflective numbers faded. I reached out, ran my fingers over the cool surface. Immediately my skin prickled. I had the unshakable feeling that I was being watched. My breath hitched, and I turned back to the RV. The headlights cast a long, distorted shadow behind me. A shadow that didn't match my stance. I froze. There was a figure standing near the trees. Not moving, just watching. My pulse pounded in my ears. I took a slow step backward. The figure didn't move. I scrambled back into the RV, slamming the door shut, locking it. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. I stared at the dashboard, at the glowing green numbers. 11:13 p.m. Something tapped against the window. I didn't look. I couldn't. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself, start. Please, just start. The engine roared back to life. I floored it. Didn't stop. Didn't look in the mirrors. Just drove. I don't take that route anymore. I go miles out of my way to avoid it. But sometimes late at night, when I glance at my dashboard, my breath catches in my throat. Because no matter what time it is, for a brief second, just a second, the clock flickers, and it always resets to 11:13 p.m. After the last time the engine died, I told myself I'd never take that route again. And for a while I didn't. I planned my drives carefully, making sure to avoid mile marker 239, even if it meant going hours out of my way. It wasn't worth the risk, not after what I'd seen. Not after the thing that had stood outside my RV watching. But the road has a way of pulling you back. A few months passed. The memory faded, not completely, but enough that it didn't feel real anymore. Like something I had dreamed in a half-conscious haze. I kept reminding myself. The mechanic found nothing wrong with the engine. I was probably just tired, hallucinating. Coincidences happen. And then, one night, I found myself on a long-haul drive to Arizona. A storm was coming in. I checked the weather, saw that I'd be driving straight into it unless I took a detour. A detour that led me right past mile marker 239. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I told myself I was overreacting. That's how it always starts, isn't it? The false sense of control. So I turned onto the old highway. And the moment my tires hit that familiar stretch of asphalt, a weight settled in my gut. I drove cautiously, keeping one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the ignition, just in case. The night was eerily quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your ears strain for a sound that isn't there. Even my radio had gone staticky. At first, it was just a faint crackling. But the closer I got to the mile marker, the worse it got. Voices, whispering, mixed with the static. Low, garbled words I couldn't make out. I reached forward, twisting the dial. The voices didn't stop. If anything, they grew clearer. Stop the engine. I yanked my hand away from the radio. My pulse was a hammer against my ribs. I was 3 miles away from the marker now. I kept my foot steady on the gas. Ignore it. Keep driving. But then, the headlights flickered. A brief stutter, just long enough to send a spike of cold panic through me. I let out a slow breath, tightening my grip on the wheel. Maybe it was the storm messing with the power. Maybe. 2 miles away now. And then I saw them. The road signs. They weren't normal. Instead of saying the usual mile marker 238, the reflective numbers were glitching, flickering like a broken screen. 238 shifted into 239. Then back. Then forward again. Like the road itself was glitching forward. I hit the brakes. Hard. The RV lurched, tires skidding slightly on the pavement. My breath came out in short gasps. No, that wasn't possible. But before I could even process it, the engine coughed. That same, horrible stuttering sound I had heard before. I slammed my foot on the gas, desperate to push past the marker before the engine died. But the harder I pressed, the more the RV fought me. The headlights dimmed. The air inside the RV grew stiflingly hot, like I had just stepped into a furnace. And then, the dashboard clock blinked to 11:13 p.m. No. The steering wheel locked up. The entire RV shuddered violently, and the engine cut out completely. I coasted to a stop, my breath ragged and uneven. My heart was slamming against my ribs, but the worst part, the absolute worst part, was the fact that this time, I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it. A presence. Something watching. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I might see outside the window. And standing there, just beyond the glow of my flickering headlights, a figure. It was just a silhouette, but it was tall, unnaturally tall, and it was facing me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, pressing against my lungs. Then, the figure tilted its head, not like a normal person. No, it was too sharp, too unnatural. And for the first time, I noticed something else. It wasn't casting a shadow. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to move, to do something, but I was frozen in place. And then the worst thing of all, the figure took a step forward. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I don't know how long it watched me, but at some point, my shaking fingers found the key. I turned it. The engine didn't start. I turned it again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. And the figure was closer now. It was just beyond the windshield. I still couldn't make out its face. Couldn't tell if it even had one. But I could feel it. A wrongness. Like it shouldn't exist. Like it was something that had slipped through the cracks of reality and landed here, at mile marker 239. And I had stopped exactly where it wanted me. I don't remember much of what happened next. At some point, I must have blacked out. Or maybe something made me forget. Because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the driver's seat. The engine was running. The clock read 3:17 a.m. And when I looked in the rearview mirror, the mile marker was gone. Just vanished. Like it had never been there at all. But the worst part was the footprints in the dirt outside my window. They led from the passenger side door, which was unlocked, straight into the woods. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember turning the engine back on. But I remember waking up. The RV was still parked on the shoulder of that endless, empty highway. My breath came out in short, uneven gasps, fogging up the windshield. My fingers ached from how tightly I had been gripping the steering wheel. 3:17 a.m. The clock on the dashboard flickered. For a second, I thought I saw it blink back to 11:13 p.m. But when I looked again, it was still 3:17. Outside, the road stretched on in both directions, silent, deserted. And yet, I wasn't alone. The thought came out of nowhere. A certainty. A sinking feeling, curling deep in my stomach. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. And that's when I saw them. The footprints, leading from the passenger side door, which was unlocked, straight into the woods. Underscore 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 underscore. I forced myself to move. My hands trembled as I reached for the lock, pressing it down with a sharp click. The sound was too loud in the suffocating silence. I didn't leave my door unlocked. I knew that for a fact, but someone or something had been inside, and the footprints leading into the woods, they weren't mine. I swallowed hard. My tongue felt like sandpaper against the roof of my mouth. I told myself not to look. But my body didn't listen. Slowly, I turned my head toward the rearview mirror, and in the reflection, standing just behind the RV, was a shape. Tall, unmoving, watching. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty road stretching into darkness. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I stared into the mirror again, heart hammering against my ribs. The figure was gone, but the footprints remained. I needed to leave. Now. My hands were slick with sweat as I grabbed the keys, twisting them in the ignition. The engine coughed, then died. No, no, no. I tried again. Nothing. A third time. Silence. A low static hissed through the radio. I hadn't turned it on. I reached for the dial, but before I could touch it, the speakers crackled, and a voice came through. You shouldn't be here. Every hair on my body stood on end. The voice was garbled, layered, like several voices speaking at once. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, the engine roared to life. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot on the gas. The RV lurched forward, tires skidding against the pavement. I didn't care about the footprints. I didn't care about the mile marker. I just needed to get away. The road stretched on, endless and empty. The farther I drove, the heavier the air inside the RV became. It pressed against my skin, thick and humid, like something unseen was breathing down my neck. I kept my hands locked on the wheel. I didn't check the mirror. I didn't check the passenger seat. Because I wasn't alone. I couldn't see it. But I could feel it. Something was in the RV with me. The thought dug into my brain like a splinter, refusing to let go. I wasn't alone. I drove faster. The trees blurred past, melting into the darkness. And then, the engine sputtered. A jolt of panic shot through me. No, not again. I pressed harder on the gas. The pedal sank beneath my foot, but the RV didn't accelerate. Instead, the dashboard lights flickered. The clock reset. 11:13 p.m. The headlights flickered, and for a brief second, I saw something in the beams. A figure, standing in the middle of the road. I jerked the wheel, swerving violently to avoid it. The tires screeched, the RV fishtailing on the asphalt. I clenched my teeth, bracing for impact. But when I looked up again, the road was empty. No figure. No sign that anything had been there at all. Just the mile marker up ahead. Mile marker 239. And my RV was slowing down. No, this wasn't possible. I had been driving for miles. I had seen the mile markers ticking by. But I was back at the same one. The road had looped. A cold shudder racked my body. The RV rolled to a stop, the engine cutting out entirely. I sat there, shaking, forcing myself to breathe. The mile marker stood just outside the windshield, its numbers flickering like a glitching screen. And then I heard it. A knock. I went still. It came again. Knock. 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 A sharp, deliberate sound. The kind that meant someone wanted to come in. The air inside the RV was too thick. My vision swam, my thoughts clouding with static. The knock came again. And then, the passenger door handle started to turn. I lunged for the lock, slamming my palm down on it. The handle jerked once, twice, before falling still. My breath came in ragged gasps. I couldn't see anything through the window, but I knew something was right outside. The knock came again. Only this time, it came from the back of the RV. My pulse slammed against my ribs. It was circling me. Whatever it wasn't human. The radio crackled. A voice came through the static. Let me in. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Don't listen. Don't respond. The voice warped, distorting into something inhuman. And then, the knock came from the roof. My body locked up. Something was on top of the RV. I could hear it, slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the metal roof. The whole vehicle shuddered under its weight. I didn't dare breathe. A long silence stretched between each footstep. And then, a single whisper slipped through the static. You can't leave. A shadow moved past the windshield. Tall. Wrong. It didn't move like a person. It glitched, jerking forward in sharp, unnatural shifts. And when it turned to face me, the headlights flickered, and I saw its face. Or rather, the lack of one. The headlights flickered. For a moment, just a split second, I saw it. The figure. Tall. Too tall. Its form was jerky, unnatural, like something caught between frames of reality. A shape that shouldn't exist. Its limbs twitched in sharp, unnatural angles, glitching between different positions. But its face. There was no face. Only a shifting, empty void where its features should have been. The headlights flickered again, and the thing was closer. A broken shudder ran through my chest. My pulse slammed against my ribs, my fingers gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles burned. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving toward me. I reached for the ignition with shaking hands. Turned the key. Nothing. The engine was dead again. A sharp, piercing whine filled the air, like an old radio signal warping in and out. I didn't dare look up. I didn't dare check the windshield. But I could feel it staring at me. Or, if it didn't have eyes, I could feel it knowing me. Click. I froze. That sound. It came from the passenger door lock. Click. 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 The door was unlocking itself. A wave of cold terror crashed over me. I lunged across the seats, slamming my palm down on the lock, but the moment I touched it, the lock snapped back open, like something was inside the door, fighting against me. I yanked my hand away like I had been burned. Then, the handle turned. The door swung open. Cold air rushed in, and for the first time I heard it. Not the radio static, not the whispering voice, but something behind all of it. A sound so deep, so unnatural, that my body rejected it. It wasn't something meant for human ears. It was wrong. A sound that shouldn't exist. It slithered through my brain like a foreign thought. A frequency just below hearing, pressing into my skull, drilling into my mind like an insect crawling through bone. And behind it, beneath the layers of static and distortion, a single voice, whispering, "You're not supposed to leave." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My limbs felt disconnected from my body, like I was being stretched between two realities. Something touched my arm. A cold, heavy weight. I snapped my head around, and it was there, inside the RV, sitting in the passenger seat. Close enough that I should have seen it enter. Close enough that I should have heard it move. But there was nothing. Nothing except its shifting, wrong body. A presence that shouldn't be there. My chest seized. The radio crackled again. The voice warped, breaking into overlapping echoes. Not supposed to leave. Not supposed to leave. Not supposed to. And then, the RV turned off. Everything went black. The headlights died. The radio cut out. The dashboard lights vanished. The only thing left was silence. I sat frozen in the darkness, gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could feel my nails digging into my skin. The air was heavy, thick, suffocating. And then, from the pitch black, a single slow breath. Not mine. Close. Too close. Something was leaning toward me. And then, a voice, whispering directly into my ear. "Stay." I snapped. Pure, mindless survival instinct took over. I grabbed the door handle and threw myself out of the RV. I hit the pavement hard, my knees slamming against the rough asphalt. Pain shot through my body, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The RV loomed in front of me, its dark shape barely visible against the empty highway. And then, the engine turned on by itself. The headlights flickered to life, and in their glow, I saw it, sitting in the driver's seat. The thing, the glitching, twitching thing, and it was turning its head toward me. Slow, deliberate, like it had just taken my place, like it was becoming me. A strangled sound tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, my vision swimming. The RV's horn blared, a sharp, deafening noise that made my skull vibrate. And then, as if reality itself had glitched, I was back inside, sitting in the driver's seat, my hands on the wheel, the passenger door shut. The highway stretched ahead, like I had never left. No, 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 no. I slammed my fists against the dashboard. This wasn't real. I had just been outside. I had just seen. But the road was empty. The RV was still. The clock on the dashboard blinked. 11:13 p.m. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. And when I looked into the rearview mirror, the figure was there, sitting in the back of the RV, motionless, watching me, waiting. For what? And then, the headlights flickered again, and the world went dark. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. The RV's engine hummed softly, as if nothing had ever been wrong. The radio was silent. The headlights burned ahead, illuminating the endless stretch of road. And yet, I wasn't alone. The rearview mirror, it showed everything. The empty road, the dim interior, and the figure, sitting directly behind me. Still, silent, waiting. My pulse hammered so hard I thought my ribs might crack under the pressure. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because I knew, if I turned, if I truly looked at it, something inside me would break. something I wouldn't be able to fix. So I sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at the road ahead, pretending I didn't see it. Pretending I wasn't trapped. The dashboard clock blinked. 11:13 p.m. A small, sharp noise escaped my throat. No. It had been 11:13 p.m. when the RV first died. It had been 11:13 p.m. when the figure first appeared. It had been 11:13 p.m. when I lost control. The time never changed. I swallowed, my throat dry and raw. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking. No service. Of course. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the dashboard, my mind spiraling. The RV was moving, but I wasn't driving. I never touched the gas. I never shifted gears. And yet, the speedometer was climbing. 30 miles per hour. 40 miles per hour. 50 miles per hour. The road outside blurred. The shadows of trees twisted and warped in the headlights. But there were no turns. No signs. No exits. I forced my eyes away from the mirror. I needed to get out. I needed to. Click. The passenger door unlocked. On its own. My body went cold. It wanted me to leave. Or it wanted something else to enter. The door handle twitched. I grabbed the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. And in that moment, the radio turned back on. Static. That horrible broken whine. But beneath it, a voice. My voice. But wrong. Distorted. Out of sync. Like a recording that had been played too many times. You can't leave. I squeezed my eyes shut. This isn't real. It's just the engine. The wiring. A malfunction. You can't leave. The words warped on the radio, repeating, overlapping. Then the passenger door swung open. Cold air flooded in. The headlights flickered, and the road was gone. Not darkness. Not fog. Just nothing. Like the world had been erased beyond the RV. My stomach lurched. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. I gripped the wheel until my fingers ached. And then, a sound. A new sound. Something was moving in the back of the RV. A shuffle. A thud. A slow, dragging noise coming closer. I squeezed my eyes shut. This isn't happening. This isn't real. The dragging sound stopped. Directly behind my seat. Then, a breath. Right against my ear. I snapped. I lunged for the open door, anything to get out. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I was back in my seat. Like I had never moved. Like I had never tried to leave. I let out a shaky breath. I stared down at my hands, gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. I didn't remember placing them there. Didn't remember moving back into position. The clock blinked. 11:13 p.m. I started shaking. It wouldn't let me go. I was stuck, driving nowhere. Or maybe I had never been anywhere else. Maybe I had always been here. Maybe I had always been trapped. The realization sank into me like a stone dropped into deep water. My mind felt like it was splintering at the edges. This was it. This was where I existed now. The RV. The road. The figure in the back seat. The radio crackled. I didn't look. I didn't want to hear what it had to say. But the voice came anyway. Familiar. Too familiar. My own voice. You were never supposed to leave. A slow, creeping dread settled in my chest. I forced myself to check the mirror. I had to see. I had to know. But the back seat was empty. No figure. No presence. Just the dark interior. But the moment I looked at the mirror, something shifted. Like the reflection wasn't quite right. Like I wasn't quite right. A sharp chill raced down my spine. The figure wasn't in the back seat anymore. It was. In the driver's seat. Looking at me. I felt my breath hitch. I blinked. And suddenly I was in the back seat. Looking at the thing. The thing that looked like me. Driving the RV. Like I had been replaced. Like I had never been in control. The last thing I heard before the world flickered out was the clock. Beeping. The numbers shifting. 11:14 p.m. Then, darkness. Next story is, I've always loved the open road. There's something about cruising down endless highways with nothing but the hum of the engine and the occasional static of a radio station struggling to hold a signal. I guess you could say my RV is more than just a vehicle. It's my home, my safe haven, my little moving world. But there's something I need to talk about. Something I don't understand. Something that's been happening for the past few months. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it, I can't find an explanation. The first time it happened, I wrote it off as a glitch, some weird mechanical hiccup. But as time went on, I started noticing a pattern. Every time I passed a cemetery, my gas gauge would drop. At first, I thought it was just a misreading, a faulty sensor. But it wasn't, because the fuel wasn't just disappearing from the gauge. It was actually draining. I don't know how to explain it. I've had mechanics look at my RV, had the fuel lines checked, the gauge recalibrated, nothing. Everything should be working fine. But it's not. And the worst part, it's getting worse. It all started on a stretch of road in the middle of nowhere, somewhere between Texas and New Mexico. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the night stretched out before me in an endless sea of blacktop and faded road signs. I remember watching the fuel gauge out of habit. I wasn't low on gas, not even close, just a little under half a tank, more than enough to make it to the next town. That's when I saw it. The needle twitched, just a little, almost like a nervous tick, flicking down and bouncing back up. At first, I ignored it. Old RVs have quirks, after all. But then, in a matter of seconds, the gauge plummeted. Half a tank, a quarter tank, an eighth. My heart stuttered as I stared at it, willing it to stop. But it didn't. The needle dropped until it hit empty, and suddenly, the engine coughed. For a moment, the RV lurched forward as if it had just run out of gas. My stomach clenched, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. But then, just as suddenly as it started, the engine smoothed out. I glanced back at the gauge. It was still at empty. What the hell? I muttered, tapping it lightly with my finger. No change. I pulled over at the next gas station, still shaken. The moment I stopped, I killed the engine and took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just a glitch. But when I stepped out to refuel, I hesitated, because the gas cap was ice cold. Not just cold like metal left in the wind, freezing, like something had sucked the warmth right out of it. A shiver ran up my spine as I unscrewed it and peered inside. The tank was still half full. The gauge had lied. I exhaled, laughing nervously to myself. Faulty wiring. That's all, I said, as if speaking the words would make them true. I topped off the tank just in case, chalking it up to an electrical issue, and got back on the road. I wish I had known then that it wasn't just a random glitch. I wish I had paid attention to where it happened. Because if I had, I would have noticed the old, crumbling cemetery just beyond the gas station's lot. The second time, the pattern begins. A week later, I had almost forgotten about it. Almost. I was somewhere along a winding rural highway, fields stretching out on either side, when it happened again. This time, I was watching the gauge, waiting for it. And sure enough, as soon as I passed the cemetery, the needle dropped. Just like before, half a tank to empty in seconds. I felt my breath catch, fingers tightening on the wheel. The RV shuddered again, hiccuping like it was running on fumes, even though I knew damn well it wasn't. I looked in the rearview mirror, my pulse hammering in my ears. The cemetery was nothing special, just a small, fenced-off patch of land with crooked headstones and a sagging iron gate. But something about it felt wrong. The moment I passed it, the gauge twitched again, and then the needle started rising. Not all at once, but slowly, like something was giving the fuel back. I let out a shaky breath, trying to push down the nausea bubbling in my gut. Okay, I whispered to myself. This is fine. This is just a bad gauge. A bad sensor. But deep down I knew. This wasn't normal. This was something else. Denying the unexplainable. I did what any sane person would do. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was altitude changes. Maybe it was a vacuum issue in the tank. Maybe it was all in my head. But the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. Every time I passed the cemetery, the fuel drained. And it wasn't just a drop in the gauge anymore. I could feel it. The RV would sputter, choke, struggle to keep going. The scariest part? It only happened when I was alone. One time, I had a friend riding with me, nothing happened. The gas gauge stayed perfectly still, as if whatever was causing this didn't want to be seen by someone else. The moment I was driving solo again, the pattern continued, and the longer I ignored it, the worse it became. The roadside gas station, a warning I should have listened to. I remember stopping at a gas station somewhere in Arkansas, one of those tiny, rundown places with flickering lights and a rusted old pump. I went inside to pay, feeling uneasy, and offhandedly mentioned to the old man behind the counter that I thought my gas gauge was acting weird. He stopped counting change. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice low and careful. I hesitated. How could I explain it? But before I could say anything else, he nodded slowly, as if he already knew. "You pass by a graveyard when it happens?" he asked. A chill skittered down my spine. "Yeah," I said. He didn't blink. Didn't look surprised. just exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You need to stop driving that route at night." His voice was flat. Final. I swallowed. "Why?" The man's eyes flicked up to meet mine. There was something dark in them. Something old. "Because things follow," he said simply. "And some of them are hungry." A silence stretched between us. My mouth felt dry. I wanted to ask more, but he slid my change across the counter and turned away, as if the conversation was over. I left the station with a heavy feeling in my chest, because I already knew deep down I wouldn't stop. That night, I parked at a small roadside rest stop. It wasn't much, just an empty lot, a single streetlight humming with dying fluorescence, and a couple of vending machines. I locked the RV doors, double-checked the windows. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up. Not because of a noise, not because of a dream, but because the gas gauge was clicking. I wasn't touching it. No one was. But the needle was moving. Up, down, like something was toying with it. And then, in the dead silence of the night, I heard it. A faint, whispering sound, coming from inside the dashboard. I don't scare easily. I've driven through back roads at night, slept in abandoned lots, and spent weeks on the road without seeing another soul. I know the usual tricks, how the mind plays games when you're alone, how shadows stretch longer than they should, how the silence of an empty highway can start whispering if you listen too hard. But this wasn't in my head. Something was happening to my RV, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The unwanted passenger. After that night at the rest stop, the night I heard the whispering from the dashboard, things started changing. It wasn't just the gas gauge anymore. At first, it was small, little things. My keys weren't where I left them. The RV smelled different when I woke up, not bad, just off. My rearview mirror would be slightly tilted, even though I hadn't touched it. And the gas issue? It got worse. Before, it only happened when I passed cemeteries. But now, the gauge would drop at random. Sometimes, I'd be parked for hours, and when I glanced at it, empty. One night, I even recorded it on my phone. I left the camera running, set it up on my dashboard, and went to sleep. The next morning, I replayed the footage. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the needle moved on its own. It didn't jump or flicker. It drained, slowly, like something was feeding on it. And then, just before the video cut off, there was a soft clicking sound. Not mechanical, not electrical, something else, like fingernails tapping on glass, trying to rationalize the impossible. I didn't want to believe it. I refused to believe it. I went to a mechanic, explained the problem, left out the supernatural parts. The guy checked everything, the fuel pump, the lines, the wiring. "Everything looks fine," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Then why does the gauge keep dropping?" He shrugged. "Could be a sensor issue. Might just be old wiring messing with the reading." I hesitated. What about the actual fuel? Could it be leaking? If it was leaking, you'd smell it. I didn't smell gas. I just smelled something else. Something cold. Something wrong. The cemetery route, a dangerous test. I should have let it go. I should have stopped driving alone at night. But I had to know. I had to see if it would happen again. So one night, I planned a test. I mapped out a route that would take me past 4 cemeteries in one drive. A stupid idea, but I needed proof. I needed to know if I was going crazy. I started just after midnight. The first cemetery was small, barely noticeable off the road. As I passed, I gripped the wheel tight, watching the gauge. At first, nothing. Then it twitched. The engine coughed. And just like before, the needle started falling. Half a tank. A quarter. An eighth. I swallowed hard, glancing in the rearview mirror. The cemetery faded into the darkness behind me. And then, like clockwork, the needle started rising again. Like something had just finished taking what it needed. The voices in the radio. I should have turned back. But I kept going. The second cemetery was larger, with towering iron gates and headstones that glowed under the moonlight. As soon as I passed it, the gauge plummeted again. But this time, something else happened. The radio turned on. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even been listening to music. At first, it was just static. A low, buzzing hum filling the RV. But then, a voice. Faint. Garbled. "Help me." My breath caught. My hands clenched the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The voice wasn't coming from a station. It was inside the static. "Can't leave." I reached for the dial, heart pounding, and turned it off. Silence swallowed the RV. But I wasn't alone. I felt it. Something sitting just out of sight, watching. The third cemetery, a presence in the RV. By the time I reached the third cemetery, I was shaking. I kept telling myself I'd turn back, but I didn't. I drove past. This time, the gauge didn't just drop. The entire RV went cold. Not a breeze, not a draft. A deep, bone-chilling cold. My breath fogged in front of me. My fingers went numb on the wheel. And then, the smell. It hit me all at once. A heavy, damp, earthy smell. Like wet soil. Like a freshly dug grave. I gagged, one hand covering my nose. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. And for just a second, I saw something in the back of the RV. A shape. A figure. A shadow that hadn't been there before. It wasn't moving. It was just sitting there. Waiting. The final cemetery. The wrong turn. I should have stopped. I should have turned around. But I had one more cemetery left. One more test. The last one was an old, abandoned graveyard off a dirt road. No gates. No lights. Just rows of forgotten headstones swallowed by the night. As I approached, the RV started shaking. Not like a normal vibration. This was violent. Like something was trying to rip the vehicle apart. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. The gas gauge spun wildly. And then, the engine died. Everything went black. No headlights. No dashboard lights. Nothing. I was alone in the dark. And in the silence, just beyond the windshield, I heard footsteps. Slow. Methodical. Coming closer. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The footsteps stopped just outside the driver's side window. And then, a tap. Soft. Fingertips against glass. My entire body locked up. I couldn't look. I wouldn't look. Then slowly the gas gauge twitched and started rising again. The lights flickered back on. The engine roared to life. But I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas and tore down the road, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't stop until I was miles away. But in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I saw it. A dark figure standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. I should have turned around. I should have driven to the nearest town, booked a motel, and abandoned the RV for the night. But I didn't. I kept driving. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the thought that if I stopped, whatever was following me might finally catch up. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone anymore. And I didn't think I ever would be again. The fuel that disappeared overnight. I finally pulled into an empty gas station, my hands still shaking. The overhead lights flickered, buzzing like they could go out at any moment. I parked, killed the engine, and let out a slow, shaky breath. Then I looked at the gauge. Half a tank. It was right back where it had been before the last cemetery, like the fuel had been borrowed and then returned. I rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself I'd misread it earlier. That exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But when I stepped out of the RV, I felt it again. The air was heavy, thick, like I was standing in a room full of people, except there was no one else around. The night was too quiet. No wind. No crickets. Just the low, distant hum of the gas station sign. I walked toward the pump, fumbling for my card. The second I touched the handle, the power cut out. The gas station went completely black. No buzzing lights. No hum. Just silence. And then, a whisper. Right behind me. You took the wrong road. The stranger at the gas station. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. My breath came out ragged, my chest tightening. No one was there, but I could still feel it. The presence. The weight of unseen eyes. Then suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The hum of the station returned, like nothing had happened. I backed away from the pump, heart hammering. I didn't even care about the gas anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. But as I turned to leave, someone stepped out from behind the station. A man. Tall. Thin. Dressed in a faded trucker jacket, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face was mostly in shadow, but I could tell he was staring directly at me. "You all right there?" he asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. Like he already knew the answer. I hesitated. "Yeah, just passing through." He nodded slowly, then glanced at my RV. "Where you headed?" I didn't know how to answer that. Nowhere. Anywhere. I just wanted to be away from here. So I said the first thing that came to mind. "South." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't drive past another cemetery." My stomach dropped. "What?" He didn't repeat himself. Didn't explain. Just turned and walked back into the shadows behind the gas station, disappearing like he had never been there at all. I didn't wait around to find out if he'd come back. I jumped into the RV, locked the doors, and peeled out of that station like the devil himself was on my tail. The black stains on the floor. I drove for hours. I didn't care about exhaustion. I just needed distance. But as the miles stretched behind me, something gnawed at my mind. The whisper, the disappearing fuel, the stranger's warning. I needed to check the RV. When I finally pulled over at a roadside lot, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just listening. The RV was silent, but it didn't feel empty. With slow, deliberate movements, I reached up and flicked on the overhead light. And that's when I saw them. The stains. Dark, wet-looking patches on the floor. Near the passenger seat. In the middle of the aisle. By the small dining table. I swallowed hard and crouched down. I pressed a finger against one of the stains. It felt cold, and when I pulled my hand back, my fingertips were black. Not wet, not oily, but something else. Something wrong. A heavy chill settled in my chest. I turned to look toward the back of the RV, toward the tiny sleeping area where the shadows seemed too thick. And in the dim light, I saw the outline of a shape. Something sitting on the bed, watching me. The shape in the darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The shadow sat completely still. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. A pile of blankets. A shifting illusion in my exhausted mind. But then, it shifted. Only slightly. A slow, deliberate movement. Like it wanted me to know it was there. I took a step back. My heel bumped against the floor, and the sound felt too loud in the silence. The shape moved again. And then, a soft sound filled the RV. A familiar sound. A tapping. Fingernails against glass. But it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the RV. From the dashboard. The RV moves on its own. I turned, just in time to see the gas gauge drop. Not twitch. Not flicker. But plummet. Full. Half. A quarter. Empty. Then, the engine roared to life. The RV lurched forward. My hands flew to the wheel, but I wasn't driving. I wasn't touching the pedals. The RV was moving on its own. The headlights flickered to life, cutting through the darkness ahead. The road stretched endlessly before me, and then I saw it. A cemetery. Another one. The headlights flickered violently. The dashboard lights pulsed like a heartbeat. And then, the radio switched on. Through the static, I heard something. A whisper. You shouldn't have stopped. Dragged back to the dead. The RV was speeding up. 50, 51, 70 miles an hour. I grabbed the wheel, tried to swerve, tried to stop whatever was happening. But the pedals weren't responding. The brakes didn't work. The cemetery was getting closer. The gravestones rising in the distance like jagged teeth. And through the static, I heard laughter. Cold, hollow, inhuman. Then, the headlights died. Everything went black. The final whisper. For a second, there was only silence. No engine. No road. Just emptiness. Then, a whisper directly in my ear. You've taken the wrong road. The darkness rushed in, and I felt something cold wrap around my wrist. Pulling me. Dragging me somewhere I didn't want to go. Then, nothing. Everything had gone dark. No headlights. No dashboard lights. Just the hum of the road beneath me and the black void stretching endlessly ahead. But I wasn't alone. I could still feel the pressure in the RV, the same heavy presence that had been creeping closer with every passing mile. And then, the whisper came again. Low. Cold. Right against my ear. You've taken the wrong road. I slammed my foot against the brakes, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Nothing. The pedal was dead. The wheel wouldn't turn. And then, the RV jerked violently to the left. My stomach flipped as the entire vehicle swerved off the road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. I fought against the wheel, but it was like someone else was driving. The gas gauge was still draining. Faster now. Quarter tank. Eighth tank. Empty. And yet, the RV kept going, dragged into the graveyard. The darkness outside wasn't just empty road anymore. Shapes were rising out of it. Tall, uneven headstones. Rows of them. A cemetery. Another one. But this time, the RV wasn't just passing by. It was driving straight into it. The headlights suddenly flickered back on, illuminating a long, winding path cutting through the graves. I saw a sign flash past. Cedar Hill Cemetery. I had never seen this place before. It wasn't on my map. And yet, somehow, I had been here before. Something deep in my gut knew this place. And that's when I saw them. Figures. standing along the edges of the cemetery road. Dark shapes, barely visible in the dim glow of the headlights. At first, I thought they were just gravestones, until I saw the way they moved. Their heads turned as I passed, watching me, their mouths moving, but I couldn't hear them. I could only hear the engine as it groaned and rattled, the gas gauge still plummeting even though the tank had already hit empty. I gritted my teeth and slammed my fist against the dashboard. Stop! And then, the engine cut out. The RV lurched to a dead stop, right in the center of the graveyard. The doors unlock on their own. I sat there, breath shallow, fingers still locked around the wheel. The silence was unbearable. No wind. No insects. Just the soft, faint tapping. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know where it was coming from. But I turned my head anyway, and that's when I saw it. The passenger side window. Something was tapping against the glass. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, 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 like it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. And then, the locks clicked open. I felt the cold rush of air as the door slowly swung inward, like it was inviting something inside. Or maybe, letting something out. The shadow in the back. My body refused to move. My brain screamed at me to grab the door, to slam it shut, to throw myself against it and keep whatever was outside from getting in. But I couldn't, because something else was already inside the RV. A slow, creeping realization settled over me. The heavy feeling pressing against my chest, the pressure in the air. It wasn't coming from the open door. It was coming from behind me. I swallowed hard and turned my head. The sleeping area, the thick, suffocating darkness pooled at the far end of the RV. And then, the shape moved. Not a trick of the shadows. Something was sitting on my bed, watching me. It speaks. The air turned freezing. Not the normal kind of cold. The kind that sinks into your bones. That freezes your breath before it leaves your lungs. My fingers went numb. And then, the voice came again. Low, ragged, like multiple voices speaking at once. You're running on borrowed time. The thing in the back shifted. I saw fingers. Long, thin fingers pressing into the mattress. The weight of something unseen pushing down on the bed. I forced my mouth to move. My lips trembled as I whispered, "What do you want?" A long silence. And then, a dry, creaking laugh. Like something that had been dead for a long, long time was trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. You don't remember? The missing time. The word sent a ripple through my brain. Like something inside me was being shaken loose. I suddenly felt disoriented. Like I had forgotten something important. Something I wasn't supposed to forget. I tried to focus, but my thoughts flickered. My vision blurred. The gas gauge. The fuel that kept disappearing. The whispering voices. The cemeteries. I had been here before. Not just tonight. Not just on this trip. I had done this before. And I had forgotten. A sharp pain stabbed through my skull, like something was forcing its way in. Or maybe, forcing its way out. I gasped, clutching my head. I don't understand. The thing in the shadows leaned closer. But you will. And then, everything collapsed. The blackout. I don't know how long I was unconscious. I don't remember falling. One moment, I was in the driver's seat. The next, I was somewhere else. Lying on my back. Staring up at a sky that wasn't a sky at all. Endless black. Stretching forever. A place with no beginning and no end. Then, a hand reached for me. Long fingers curling toward my face. A whisper barely audible. "Come back!" Waking up in the wrong place. I gasped awake, choking on my own breath. The RV was still. The morning sun filtered through the windshield. Birds chirped in the distance. Like nothing had happened. Like it had all been a nightmare. But when I looked around, I realized I wasn't at the cemetery anymore. I was somewhere else. A different road. A different town. And worst of all, I didn't remember how I got there. Final omen. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the road stretching ahead. The town looked normal. Shops. People. Cars moving along the street. Like the night before had never happened. But as I turned my head toward the dashboard, my breath caught in my throat. The gas gauge. It was full. Not just topped off. Completely, impossibly full. And then, the radio crackled to life. A voice, garbled and distant, barely pushing through the static. "We'll see you again soon." The gas gauge was full. Not just topped off, completely, impossibly full. And the radio, that garbled, static-filled voice still whispered through the speakers. "We'll see you again soon." I stared at the dashboard, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I had been on empty. The RV had died in the middle of that graveyard. I remembered the whispering figures, the freezing air, the presence in the back of the RV. And now I was parked in a completely different place. The small town outside my windshield was bright, normal, alive. But I didn't remember driving here. And something inside me whispered that I shouldn't be here at all. The town that shouldn't exist. I slowly opened the RV door and stepped outside. The warm morning air hit my skin, the scent of fresh coffee and car exhaust filling my nose. I turned to look at the RV. It was perfectly parked along the curb, as if I had pulled in here deliberately. The only problem? I had never seen this town before. The buildings were old but well kept, the streets quiet but not abandoned. A few people walked along the sidewalks, chatting, going about their morning routines. Too normal, like a postcard-perfect town plucked straight out of time. I caught sight of a gas station down the street. The name on the sign read, Cedar Hill Gas and Market. A sharp jolt shot through my chest. Cedar Hill. That was the name of the cemetery from last night. A cold, creeping dread slithered down my spine. I didn't understand what was happening, but I needed answers. And I needed them now. The gas station attendant knows me. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside the gas station. A thin man behind the counter glanced up. His face was familiar. Too familiar. Like I had seen him before, but I couldn't remember when. His eyes locked onto mine, and his expression shifted. Not shock. Not confusion. Recognition. Back already? My stomach dropped. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? The man frowned, wiping his hands on a rag. Thought you left town a while ago. Didn't think we'd see you again. I stared at him, my mind racing. I've never been here before. The man gave me a long, unreadable look. Then, without a word, he pointed toward the old cork bulletin board near the coffee machines. I turned, and my blood went cold. Pinned to the board was a photo of my RV. Same make, same model, same rust stains along the edges. But there was something off about it. It looked older, like the picture had been taken years ago. And worse, right next to the photo was a yellowed newspaper clipping. I stepped closer, my breath shallow as I read the headline. Local man vanishes after driving through Cedar Hill Cemetery. A name was listed beneath it. My name. Lost time. My vision swam. The world tilted. This was a joke. A mistake. It had to be. I turned back to the attendant, my hands shaking. This can't be right. The man exhaled, setting down his rag. You really don't remember, huh? Something flickered in my brain. A painful pulse of memory. The feeling of being watched. The gas gauge dropping to empty over and over again. The whisper, you've taken the wrong road. I had been here before. And then I had forgotten. The town is wrong. I stumbled outside, gripping the side of the RV for support. My breathing came fast and shallow. I needed to get out of here. Now. I threw open the RV door and climbed into the driver's seat. My fingers turned the key. The engine roared to life. The gas gauge still read full. But as I gripped the wheel and stared at the road ahead, the town had changed. The people were still walking, still chatting. But something was wrong. They weren't moving normally. Their heads turned too slowly. Their eyes lingered on me for too long. Like they were waiting for something. Or waiting for me to remember. Trying to escape. I slammed the RV into gear and peeled away from the curb. The streets twisted and turned. Too many intersections, too many wrong turns. I couldn't find the highway. I couldn't find any way out. I drove past the same gas station 3 times. The same people. The same smiling attendant standing in the doorway. Watching. Waiting. I gritted my teeth. No. No, no, no. I stomped the accelerator. The RV lurched forward. The speedometer climbed. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. The town wasn't getting smaller. It was getting closer. Like I was driving deeper into it. Panic clawed at my chest. The road ahead blurred. My thoughts fractured, memories twisting. The gas gauge still read full. And suddenly I understood. The fuel had never been running out. I had been draining, disappearing. Every time I passed the cemetery, I lost pieces of myself. Pieces of time. Until finally, there was nothing left. Just an RV with a full tank. And a town full of familiar faces. Faces that had once belonged to people like me. People who had been trapped here before. The last glitch. The static crackled through the radio again. That whispering voice. We'll see you again soon. I stared at the road ahead, my hands shaking on the wheel. And that's when I saw it. The sign. Cedar Hill Cemetery, next exit. I blinked. I had just left that place. But now it was ahead of me again. Like I had been looping this road forever. Like I had never left. And deep in my gut, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't just passing through. I was part of the road now. The gas gauge would always be full. Because I would never need to stop again. The road stretched ahead. And I drove toward the cemetery. Like I had done before. Like I would do again. Like I had always done. Next story is, I never thought much about where I was going when I hit the road. It was just me, my old RV, and the open highway. Freedom. That was the dream, wasn't it? No fixed address, no deadlines, no one telling me what to do. Just miles of road stretching endlessly ahead, carrying me toward nowhere in particular. At least, that's how it started. I bought the RV from an estate sale a few months ago. It was a 1989 Gulfstream Sun Voyager, faded beige with peeling maroon stripes. The previous owner had been a full-time traveler, just like I wanted to be. The price was almost too good to be true, low enough that I didn't ask too many questions. I figured it was just a lucky find. Maybe I should have asked. That first day, I felt invincible. I loaded up on gas, stocked the mini fridge, and set off with no destination in mind. It was exhilarating, feeling the vibration of the wheel under my hands, the hum of the tires against the asphalt. I let the GPS pick random roads, winding through sleepy towns and back roads, anywhere that looked interesting. For the first few nights, it was everything I imagined. Camped near rivers, parked under the stars, coffee steaming in my hands while I listened to the soft rustling of trees in the night breeze. Then, on the fourth night, I woke up somewhere else. A subtle but wrong detail. I'd parked at a rest stop just off the highway, a spot where truckers pulled over to sleep. I made sure everything was secure. The doors locked, keys tucked inside the little dish near the sink, curtains drawn. I even set my phone alarm for sunrise, planning to get an early start. But when I opened my eyes, the view outside the windshield was different. I wasn't at the rest stop anymore. Instead, I was parked on the shoulder of a desolate road, completely alone. At first, I told myself I'd just driven here in my sleep. Maybe I'd woken up groggy, decided I didn't like the rest stop, and moved somewhere quieter. It wasn't impossible. People did strange things half asleep. I checked my phone. The battery was nearly dead, weird, since I'd left it charging. When I plugged it in, the screen flickered, showing the wrong time. 11:13 p.m. That didn't make sense. The sun was rising. It should have been at least 6:30 a.m. Unease settled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. A glitch. That's all. Just a GPS error. I grabbed the keys and started the RV, relieved when the engine roared to life. I turned on the GPS to get back to the highway, but something felt off about the route. The map wasn't showing proper roads, just a single, winding path with no labels. And instead of start navigation, the button read, continue route. I hesitated. That wasn't right. The last time I checked, I didn't have any active route planned. But I must have, right? Maybe I had started one and forgotten. I hit the button. The robotic voice spoke in an unfamiliar tone. Proceed forward. Do not deviate. More than just a glitch. The morning air was thick with fog as I drove. The road was eerily empty, no other cars, no mile markers, nothing but endless gray. My headlights barely cut through the mist, illuminating only a few feet ahead. Every turn, every stretch of road felt strangely familiar, as if I'd driven it before. But that wasn't possible. Then I saw it. A gas station. A rundown, abandoned gas station sitting at the intersection of a crossroads. The windows were boarded up, the sign overhead too faded to read. The gas pumps were old, rusted, like they hadn't been used in decades. And yet, the lights inside were on. The GPS spoke again. Stop here. I pulled into the lot, more out of nervous habit than actual need. The RV rumbled as I shifted into park. The moment I did, the dashboard flickered. The radio turned on by itself, static hissing through the speakers. I reached out and switched it off. It turned back on. More static. Then, beneath the hissing, a whisper. You're back. I jerked my hand away. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the radio, waiting for the voice to continue. But it didn't. The static hummed, then cut out abruptly. The RV fell silent. I swallowed hard. My instincts screamed to leave now. I gripped the gear shift and tried to pull out of park, but the RV didn't budge. The engine was still running. I could hear it humming beneath me, but the gear wouldn't move. I yanked harder. Nothing. Then, without warning, the horn blared. I jumped, my hands flying off the gear shift. The deafening sound echoed through the empty gas station lot, rattling my chest. I hadn't touched the horn. Then the windshield wipers started. Then the headlights flickered. Then the locks clicked shut. Something was very, very wrong. I reached for my phone, but the screen was still frozen at 11:13 p.m. No signal. No way to call for help. And then, the radio crackled to life again. "Don't fight it." My stomach lurched. That was a real voice. A real person. A man's voice, deep, calm. I twisted the volume knob to 0. It kept playing. "You've already started the route. You have to finish it." I slammed my fist against the dashboard. "Who is this?" Silence. The lights inside the gas station flickered. Something moved behind the boarded-up windows. A dark shape, shifting behind the wooden slats. That was it. I needed to get the hell out of here. I reached for the ignition, ready to rip the keys out, but the RV suddenly lurched forward. The seatbelt tightened across my chest. The gas pedal pressed down on its own. I wasn't driving anymore. The RV was. The road that knows. The engine revved as the vehicle rolled forward, smoothly pulling out of the gas station. My hands hovered over the wheel, but I wasn't touching it. The RV steered itself, making deliberate turns down roads I didn't recognize. My breathing came fast, panic clawing at my throat. I yanked at the seatbelt, but it wouldn't budge. I stomped on the brakes. Nothing happened. The GPS screen glowed brighter. The words changed. "Proceed forward. Do not deviate." I tried the door handle, but the locks wouldn't give. I banged my fists against the window, screaming for help, but there was no one to hear me. The RV rolled onward, smooth and steady, like it had a destination in mind, like it knew exactly where it was going. And I had the sickening feeling that it had done this before. A road that shouldn't exist. The RV rolled down the road in perfect control, except I wasn't the one driving it. I had tried everything. The wheel wouldn't turn under my grip, the brakes were useless, and the seatbelt was locked so tight across my chest that I could barely breathe. Outside, the world didn't feel real anymore. The road ahead wasn't part of any highway I recognized. The yellow dividing lines were faint and cracked, the pavement so old it was barely holding together. There were no street signs, no mile markers, and the fog. It had thickened, curling along the edges of the windshield, moving in slow, deliberate waves, like something alive. I glanced at the GPS. "Proceed forward. Do not deviate." I reached for the power button, trying to shut the whole thing off, but the screen didn't budge. I yanked the power cord out. The GPS should have died. Instead, the screen glowed brighter. I had no idea where I was. No phone signal. No way out. And the RV kept driving. A wrong turn into nowhere. I don't know how long I sat there, watching helplessly as the RV made turn after turn down the desolate road. At some point, I realized something was missing. I hadn't seen a single other car. Not since leaving that gas station. No traffic. No tail lights ahead of me. No headlights in my rearview mirror. Just an endless stretch of road leading deeper into nowhere. I banged my fist against the dashboard. "Let me out." Nothing. The GPS just repeated its soulless command. "Proceed forward. Do not deviate." I couldn't stand it anymore. My pulse hammered in my ears, my skin slick with sweat. I forced myself to breathe, trying to think. There had to be a way to stop this. Then something changed. The RV slowed. For the first time since it had taken control, it came to a complete stop. The engine idled, soft and steady. I glanced around. We were parked in front of a tunnel. A massive, dark tunnel stretching under what looked like a mountain. There were no signs. No lights. Just a gaping mouth of darkness. The headlights barely touched the interior. The blackness inside was thick, suffocating, impenetrable. The GPS screen flickered. New words appeared. "Wait! Do not exit vehicle." My stomach twisted. Something about that tunnel was wrong. It wasn't just dark. It was empty, like there was nothing inside, like it didn't end. I swallowed hard, pulse quickening. The air in the RV felt stale, too still. Then, in the silence, a sound, a single distant footstep, coming from inside the tunnel. The presence inside the tunnel. I froze. The step was slow, deliberate. Then another. Then another. A steady, rhythmic approach. Something was coming. My hand shot to the ignition. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I jammed the gear shift into reverse, but the RV didn't move. The screen flickered again. "Wait! Do not exit vehicle." I did not want to wait. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the tunnel's black maw. Then, through the thick haze of darkness, I saw it. A shape. A figure. Tall. Thin. Almost human, but not quite. The way it moved was all wrong, like it was stepping forward, but somehow not covering any distance. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body screamed to run. I yanked at the seatbelt, desperate to free myself. My fingers dug at the latch, but it wouldn't release. Outside, the figure stopped, right at the tunnel's entrance, close enough that I could almost make out a face. Then, the headlights flickered, and in that split second of darkness, the figure vanished. No way out. The air inside the RV was thick, suffocating. My hands were shaking. The headlights flickered back on, showing nothing but the tunnel ahead. But I knew something had been there, and now it was somewhere else. The GPS beeped. A new message. Proceed forward. Do not deviate. No, I wasn't going into that tunnel. I didn't care what the RV wanted, what this thing was, or what had taken control. I needed to get out. I threw my weight against the door, trying to break it open. The handle refused to move. I reached under the seat for the emergency hammer, but it was gone. I sucked in a sharp breath. It knew. Whatever this was, it knew. A deep, rattling sound filled the air. I turned toward the passenger seat. The seatbelt was moving. Not fast, slowly. Unraveling. Like someone was undoing it from the inside. I choked back a scream. The engine revved. The headlights flashed again. The GPS flickered. And suddenly, the RV lurched forward, straight into the tunnel, driving into the unknown. The moment I crossed the threshold, the outside world vanished. No more sky. No more road behind me. Just pure, endless blackness. The headlights barely illuminated the tunnel walls, smooth, gray stone that curved too perfectly. The moment stretched too long. I should have seen the other side by now. But the road just kept going. I checked the time on my phone. It still read 11:13 p.m. The GPS screen changed. No more text. Just a countdown. 5 o'clock. 4:59. 4:58. I stared at it, my stomach twisting into knots. A countdown to what? 4:30. 4:29. The RV kept driving, steady and smooth, as if the tunnel had no end. Then, a whisper. A soft, ragged voice, crawling through the speakers. You should have listened. I slammed my hands over my ears. Listen to what? The whisper didn't stop. You should have waited. For a clock. 3:59. 3:58. The air grew colder. My breath came in fast, uneven gasps. Something was in here with me. Not outside. Inside. A shift in the shadows. A shape moving in the back of the RV. I turned my head, and for a split second, I saw a reflection in the microwave door. A face. Not mine. The road with no exit. I scrambled, reaching for the wheel, for anything that could get me out of this tunnel. The countdown kept ticking down. 1:30. 1:29. The RV's speed increased. The road started to feel wrong. The tunnel curved in impossible ways. The walls seemed closer. 30 seconds. A new message flashed across the GPS screen. Look up. I didn't want to, but I did. And then I realized there was no ceiling anymore. Just a vast, endless black void. And something was looking back at me. A presence. A thing far too big to comprehend. A shape shifting in the nothingness. And then, the GPS flashed one final message. You should have deviated. Midnight. The world went black. The darkness that swallowed me. I didn't remember blacking out. One moment, the GPS had counted down to 0. The next, I woke up slumped over the wheel. The air was thick, like a sealed-off room that hadn't been opened in years. I straightened, blinking rapidly. My body felt wrong, like I'd been asleep for days, my limbs sluggish and uncooperative. The dashboard clock still read 11:13 p.m. That wasn't possible. I swallowed hard and turned my head toward the windshield. The tunnel was gone. So was the road. I was parked in the middle of a vast, empty lot. The pavement was cracked and uneven. Faded parking lines stretched into the distance, vanishing into the swirling fog that pressed in from all sides. There were no buildings, no streetlights, just the silent, suffocating emptiness of a place that shouldn't exist. I reached for the ignition, heart pounding. The keys were gone. I patted my pockets, nothing. I tried the door handle. Locked. Then from behind me, a sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The microwave door was closed. But something was tapping on the inside of it. The microwave reflection. The tapping continued, slow, deliberate. I inched forward, gripping the edge of the counter for balance. My own reflection stared back at me in the microwave's dark glass. Except it wasn't quite right. The eyes were too wide. The mouth slightly open as if whispering. The tapping stopped. Then, in a single jerky motion, my reflection smiled. I stumbled backward, slamming against the fridge. My reflection wasn't copying me anymore. It just stood there watching. Then its head tilted to the side, just slightly. The microwave door swung open on its own. Inside, there was something sitting on the glass plate. A single rusted car key. I stared, my pulse hammering in my ears. Slowly, I reached inside. The second my fingers touched the key, the entire RV shook violently. The lights flickered. The GPS crackled, the screen glowing with static. The air grew thick with the stench of burning metal. I clutched the key, staggering toward the driver's seat. I had to get out of here. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The RV roared to life. Outside, the fog rushed toward me like a living thing. And then, I saw it, through the windshield. Something was standing in the fog, watching. The figure that shouldn't be there. It was impossible to make out details. The fog clung to its shape, shifting, twisting. But it was tall, unnaturally tall. And it wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. My breath hitched. I threw the RV into drive and slammed my foot onto the gas. The wheels screeched against the cracked pavement. The RV shot forward, toward the edge of the parking lot, toward anything but this place. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. Where was the road? Where was I? The fog thickened, swirling violently on either side of me. My headlights barely cut through it. Then, a flicker. For a fraction of a second, the figure was standing right outside my window. I barely saw it before the fog swallowed it again. I gasped, my whole body seizing with terror. It had gotten closer. The RV lurched. The wheel spun on its own. I wrestled with it, trying to keep control, but something was turning me, steering me, forcing me down a road that wasn't on the GPS. The road that changed while I drove. The asphalt was wrong. At first, it looked like any normal back road, faded lane markings, cracked pavement, lined by tall, looming trees. But the more I drove, the stranger it became. The trees, they weren't staying in place. They shifted. I couldn't explain it, but I knew they weren't where they had been a second ago. They were closer, leaning inward. And the road behind me? When I checked the rearview mirror, there was nothing there. Just more fog, more empty darkness. I pressed harder on the gas. I had to find something real. A landmark. A town. Anything. The GPS screen flickered again. A new message. You are not alone. My entire body went cold. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror. There was someone sitting in the back of the RV. The passenger that wasn't there before. I couldn't breathe. The figure was in the farthest seat, shrouded in shadow. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me. The RV's lights flickered, the engine growling beneath me. I didn't dare turn around. Didn't dare acknowledge it. The GPS flickered again. Do not look at it. My hands tightened on the wheel. The figure shifted. The air turned heavy, suffocating. I could feel its presence, looming, waiting. I forced my gaze forward, fixating on the road. The trees were so close now they were almost brushing the sides of the RV. The road itself was narrowing. Then, the thing spoke. You're going the wrong way. The voice was distorted, like someone speaking through an old radio, warping in and out of static. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel until my fingers ached. Ignore it. Keep driving. The headlights flickered, just for a second. And in that second, the figure was closer. Not in the back anymore. 2 seats closer. The final warning. The GPS screen glitched, the text distorting. Then new words. If you stop, it will take your place. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I couldn't stop. Couldn't let it get any closer. The road ahead twisted violently, a sharp curve appearing out of nowhere. I yanked the wheel, barely making the turn. Then, out of nowhere, a gas station. Lit up. Real. A way out. I didn't think. I floored the gas, barreling toward the station. The figure in the seat was right behind me now. I could feel it leaning forward. The headlights illuminated the gas station parking lot. The RV skidded to a stop. I lunged for the door handle, throwing myself out. The second my feet hit the pavement, the RV's engine died. Silence. I turned, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my back. The windows were dark. The RV was empty. I staggered backward. What had just happened? Then, a figure stepped out of the gas station, a man in a stained uniform. He looked at me, frowning. Then he glanced at the RV, and his face went pale, like he had seen it before. I swallowed hard. Where am I? His lips parted, then closed. He shook his head. You shouldn't be here. Something is waiting. The gas station's buzzing lights were the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. The air was thick with gasoline and something rotten, something old. The man at the counter, his uniform stained and wrinkled, just stared at me, his jaw tight, his hands twitching against the counter. You shouldn't be here, he repeated, his voice low. I swallowed hard, glancing back at my RV. The headlights were off. The engine was silent. But I didn't trust it. It had brought me here. It had tried to take me somewhere else. And now, something had followed me. I turned back to the gas station attendant, my voice barely above a whisper. Where am I? He exhaled through his nose, glanced at the RV, then at me. I don't know. I frowned. What do you mean you don't know? Where's the nearest town? The nearest highway? His eyes darkened. People don't come here on purpose. If you're here, you were brought here. By what? I snapped. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out something small, a Polaroid. An old, faded picture. My stomach lurched. It was my RV, but it was older. Rusted. Faded. The windows were shattered. The tires had sunk into the dirt, like it had been sitting there for years. And behind the wheel, a figure. Tall. Watching. Its head tilted slightly, just like the reflection in the microwave. I staggered backward. What the hell is this? The attendant's expression didn't change. You're not the first. A flicker of movement. I turned. Through the station's glass doors, I saw the RV's headlights turn on. The RV wants me back. The ignition was off. The keys were still in my pocket. But the RV wasn't done with me. The engine growled, low and uneven. The headlights flickered like a dying breath. And then, the passenger door slowly opened, inviting me back in. No. I shook my head, stepping away. The air in the gas station suddenly dropped. Cold, unnatural. The kind that seeps into your bones, stiffens your joints. The attendant clenched his jaw. If you leave it waiting too long, it won't let you choose. Choose what? I asked, my voice shaking. His stare was hollow. Whether you go willingly. The figures in the fog. A deep, suffocating silence pressed down on the gas station. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed impossibly loud. Then, the fog moved. It rolled in like a living thing, swallowing the distant road. And within it, shapes. Shadowy figures watching from the edges. I felt it before I saw it, the presence inside the RV. It was waiting, not just inside the vehicle, but inside me. The air was thick with static. Then, a sound from inside the RV. A voice. My voice. It came from the driver's seat. Muffled, distorted, as if played through a dying radio. Where are we going? I turned to the attendant, my breath shallow. What happens if I go back in? His fingers tapped against the counter. You'll keep driving. My stomach twisted. And if I don't? His gaze flickered toward the fog, where the figures were inching closer. Then you'll take someone else's place. The choice that wasn't mine. The gas station lights dimmed. The RV's engine growled louder. And then the voice from inside laughed. Soft. Mocking. I backed up, my brain screaming for an answer, for an escape, for a way out of this that didn't end in something wearing my skin. Then, the Polaroid in my hand changed. The image blurred, distorting. And suddenly, I wasn't in the picture anymore. The driver's seat was empty. Waiting. My head snapped up. The attendant was gone. The fog had swallowed the station. I was alone. And then, a sharp, sudden click. I turned. The RV door was open. The interior was pitch black. And within the darkness, a tall, grinning shape, waiting for me to come home. I couldn't run. The fog pressed in from all sides. The figures in the mist inched closer. The road behind me was gone. The Polaroid in my hand was burning hot. I stepped forward. The RV's engine purred. I could feel something shifting inside me. Something old. Something that had been waiting for a new driver. I climbed inside. The moment my foot hit the floor, the door slammed shut behind me. The dashboard flickered. The GPS screen lit up with a new destination. 0 miles to go. I turned to the driver's seat. And sitting there was me, grinning, waiting. The last thing I saw before the headlights flickered and the engine revved was my own reflection reaching for the wheel. I wasn't in control anymore. The second I sat in the driver's seat, something shifted inside me. It felt like sinking, like my body was being swallowed from the inside out. My hands trembled as they touched the steering wheel, but the moment my fingers made contact, they stopped shaking. They went still, calm, like this had been my seat all along, like I had always belonged here. The windshield was fogged up, but I could barely make out the gas station behind me. The lights inside flickered weakly, struggling to stay on. The gas station attendant was gone. The fog had thickened. The road outside the gas station no longer existed. Just endless white mist. And yet, the RV started moving. The road that shouldn't exist. The wheel turned under my hands, on its own. My foot wasn't even on the gas pedal. But the RV was driving anyway. I should have jumped out. I should have fought. But I couldn't. Because I wasn't in control anymore. My hands gripped the wheel, tight, too tight. Like they belonged to someone else. Like I was just a passenger in my own body. The GPS flickered on the dashboard. The screen glitched, twisting into static, but through the distortion, I could make out the words. 0 miles to go. And just beneath that, welcome home. A cold chill crept up my spine. Home. I tried to press the brakes, but my foot wouldn't move. I tried to swerve, but the wheel wouldn't budge. I wasn't driving. The RV was. Who's watching me? The deeper I went into the fog, the quieter everything became. No wind. No engine noise. Even my own breath sounded muted. Then, a whisper. It came from behind me. Inside the RV. I knew I was alone. I had to be alone. But the whispering continued. Soft. Like something was crouched just behind my seat, murmuring right against my ear. I forced my eyes forward. I wouldn't look. I wouldn't turn around. Because I knew if I did, I would see something sitting there. Watching me. Grinning. And if I saw it, it would see me. The roads that shouldn't connect. The fog thinned, revealing a road I didn't recognize. It wasn't on any map. The street signs were wrong. I squinted at them, my brain struggling to process. They were upside down, the letters backward, the pavement cracked and flickering, like it wasn't real, like it was just a memory of a road, an echo of something that no longer existed. And then I saw the other RVs, parked along the roadside. Some were old and rusted, abandoned husks eaten by time. But some were new, like they had just arrived, like they had been taken here just like me. The faces in the windows. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't look, but my eyes betrayed me. And I saw them, in the RV windows. Faces, distorted. Some of them looked like they were screaming. Others were grinning, but none of them moved. They just watched. And as I passed each RV, I saw my own reflection in their windows. But it wasn't really me. It was something else. Something with my face. Something that was getting closer. I clenched the wheel, forcing my eyes forward. But in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A shape in the back seat. No. I blinked, and it was gone. But I could still feel it. The weight of something breathing behind me. Something waiting. The detour that shouldn't exist. The GPS glitched again. New words appeared on the screen. Final stop, 1 mile ahead. I swallowed hard. I had no idea what was waiting for me at the end of this road. But I knew I wouldn't come back. I knew if I made it to that destination, I'd be trapped. I had to stop this. I had to wake up. I yanked at the wheel, trying to force the RV off the road, but my hands wouldn't move. They weren't my hands anymore. And then, I saw it. A sign. It was covered in dirt, nearly unreadable, but I caught 2 words. No exit. A choked breath escaped my lips. This road was never meant to lead anywhere else. I wasn't getting out. The RV wasn't letting me leave. And then, a laugh. Soft. Close. Right against my ear. My stomach twisted, and I realized something. Something horrible. I hadn't been alone in this RV for a long time. A new driver. The headlights ahead blinded me. A turn was coming up. I saw a massive, rusted sign just before it. Welcome home. The moment I saw it, my body moved on its own. My hands turned the wheel. The RV obeyed. Like I had driven this road 1,000 times before. Like I had been meant to return. A memory that wasn't mine flashed in my mind. An image of someone else sitting in this seat. Someone before me. Their hands on this same wheel. And then, in the mirror, I saw them. The thing that had been behind me all along. It grinned, and I felt it move forward, sliding into me, taking the seat for itself. The end that never ends. I can't tell you what happened next. Because I don't remember. Because it's not me driving anymore. I can still see. Still think. Still scream inside my own head. But my body, it's not mine. My hands grip the wheel, but I don't control them. My foot presses the gas, but I don't feel it. I can't turn. I can't stop. I can only watch. The road stretches endlessly ahead. The GPS flickers again. And now, instead of a destination, it just says one thing: picking up new passenger. And somewhere in the distance, I see another lone traveler, walking alongside the road. They don't see me yet, but soon they will. Soon I'll pull over, and when they step inside, they'll take my place, and I'll finally be free. Until the next time, until the next driver, until the next nightmare begins again.